Hey, so the theme of this video, the subject I want to be covering is consumer rights, the nature of complaining, raising awareness, that is, of concerns or complaints, shortcomings of public service and public service outlets, if I put it that way, and why I feel that complaining in itself is not fickle and is not something that we should be embarrassed about. So there's sort of two schools of thought. One is that you kind of keep quiet. Oh, I don't want to make a fuss about that. So yes, I've had this stressful experience. Yes, I feel I've been treated unfairly as a consumer. Yes, it's been stressful, but I'll let it go. I don't want to make a fuss about it. Then there's the other school of thought. Well, wait a second. I'm a paying customer, and I have a right to stand my ground and say this is my experience. Now, I have to say I probably fit more into the latter category. I do agree that sometimes there are people who will look for reasons to complain about every single thing. And I can understand that. I have a lot of sympathy with business people and those who are in a managerial position. They are under a lot of pressure, and it's not easy to please everyone all the time. I fully appreciate that. And no matter how hard you try, there is the human factor. We are all human beings. No one can be 100% perfect at their job. So there is going to be that human factor, and there will be times when public service outlets, and I'm using that as an umbrella term, I'll be more specific in a second, but where people get let down, okay? So I can certainly see that some people are just like to complain for the sake of it, and they expect perfection, and they don't take into account the position that someone else is in. Having said that, I don't agree that people should always be quiet and not stand up for their rights as a consumer, as someone who is paid for a service. I've worked in a number of jobs where I've worked with members of the public, where I've been in interaction with members of the public. Now, by my own admission, I've never been the best person at the job I've been doing, but I've always strived to put myself in the shoes of the customer or the consumer or the client or the person that I'm working with to think, well, if I was in their position, what would I want to expect? What would I expect from this company? So I do value professionalism quite highly. One thing that does irritate me is when you go into a shop or some other sort of any sort of outlet that is serving the public and you're dealing with plain rudeness where people just don't care about how they communicate with people and they don't care about how they address members of the public. I've no respect for that actually. It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Waldorf Astoria, you know, the top brands or services, or you're talking about a low level everyday shop. Public service is public service, and I think that manners cost nothing. Um, So I think that's very important. If I was a business person, and it is an idea that I've looked at, I need to educate myself a lot more about the ins and outs of it. But if I ever go down that route, I would absolutely strive to ensure that both myself and the people that I employ um, treat customers in a civil way, in a polite way. Now, of course, customers also have a responsibility, and the fact is, you do also get very rude customers. And again, I'm talking real umbrella terms here. It could be a shop, it could be some sort of public entertainment service, like as we say in the UK, cinema chains or movie theaters. It could be a bowling alley. It could be anything. I would say a very large proportion of the workforce is in the public sphere, i.e., dealing with other members of the public. Um, and to be honest, I think it makes everyone's day run smoother if there's some common respect, certainly from the service, but also from the public. And I try to be open minded in this. So, for example, let's say if we're looking at the transport sector, right? We've all been in the situation where we've had a delayed train or a delayed flight, and it can be incredibly stressful. That goes without saying. Most of us have been there. Anyone who's had any experience of travel has been there. I've experienced this more times than I would have liked. And it is a stressful experience. But one thing I've never understood is people who yell then, for example, at airport um, service desks, information desks, and they just yell at the staff there. It's not their fault if a flight is being cancelled. One thing I think, and I'm aware of not expanding too far into the individual fields that I'm talking about. But one thing I do think that is very, very important is providing information, and I can understand why people get frustrated with that if there is a lack of information. So this flight's been cancelled or this train's been cancelled, but we're not going to tell you why. Or if they do tell you why, they don't tell you, well, you need to get this bus replacement at this place at this time. It's just like bus replacements available. This is particularly a problem in the UK. The lack of information is woeful, especially given the money that people pay. Train services in this country are expensive. And I think if you ask members of the public, the majority would say it's not value for money, given the number of times that people feel let down by the service that is given. Um, and I think companies need to get their act together and understand that, they need to put themselves in the shoes of the passengers. Having said that, there are things that really are beyond their control, and I think the public need to be understanding. So, say, for example, there's been a suicide on the line. Yes, it causes a lot of inconvenience, and you could argue that the person's been selfish, but there is still a human factor there. There's a human factor from the driver who's had to see that and who's probably dealing with post traumatic stress. There is a human factor from the relatives of the deceased person. You have to have the capacity to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But I do think that companies have to understand that customers, people lead busy lives. That they're paying money and they expect one thing in this local area that irritates me about Tyne and Wear Metro. If they inconvenience customers, if one of their trains fails, and there's a lot of economics and politics behind this, but if one of their trains fails, um, rarely do they apologise. They might provide an update on their Facebook page. Personally, I think their service is a long way to go. Now, if someone doesn't pay for the ticket, which I don't condone, but if someone doesn't pay for the ticket, Tyne and Wear Metro is immediately on to that. They're very efficient at prosecuting people, but they're not efficient at providing a great service. And I think there has to be a consistency. Too many companies give the impression that they're only interested in protecting themselves. So when they do let down people, I think too many companies don't go nearly far enough to reassure people, we've messed up. This is our fault. We're going to reimburse you. That's an area I think most companies really need to improve. Certainly most train companies. There's a very long way to go. I fly less, but I think also a lot of the aviation companies has a long way to go in improving their standards. There's a lot of areas to look at. Take, for example, baggage handlers. Now, I know their job isn't easy. I know it's not fun, but in the end of the day, they are being paid to do a job. And I personally think that baggage handlers who, throw people's stuff around that don't take care when they're doing that, I would sack them, quite frankly. Um, Unions are always, quick to talk about the rights of the workforce, and I'm someone who believes in that unions have a place. Okay, so I'm not neoconservative in this. I do believe in workers' rights. I do believe that when there are certain conditions exposed in the workplace that are bad, payment issues and so on, that needs to be addressed. But what unions need to understand is that clients and customers, passengers also have rights. And there are some people, frankly, are jobs worth. They don't care about, so certain baggage handlers, I'm not talking about everyone. So if you are a baggage handler, I'm not talking about everyone. But the fact of the matter is, there are some baggage handlers that just throw people's stuff around and they don't care. This is someone else's property they're messing around with. And that pisses me off. Um, so if I was an aviation CEO, I'd be, looking at that from the ground level up. I'd be saying, I want to see firsthand how the baggage handlers treat people's things. I would be wanting to look at what how good the information is in terms of if there is a delay, is the information being made to customers in an efficient manner? So, anyway, to get to the point I was making at the start about the nature of complaining, like I say, there's people who say, "Oh, I'll just let it go." Here's the thing: if everybody just lets it go, nothing changes because companies can't get any feedback. So how are they supposed to know? To be fair to them, they can't be expected to change if they don't have the information, if they don't know that there is dissatisfaction. Of course, it is important that people are civil and they don't send like threatening messages and that sort of thing. So I've done this numerous times. If I have had some sort of service and I felt it was a disappointment and I paid money for that, yes, I have complained through the formal channels. I mean, you could look at a whole range of areas in this, and it isn't just in terms of consumer spending, it's also in terms of any sort of public service, really, including, for example, the police. In the UK, we have the Independent Police Complaints Commission, which basically is an independent body. If the police behave in a non professional manner, say, for example, you report a crime and you feel they didn't show you any sympathy and they were downright rude, some officers are, I've experienced this, you can complain through the IPCC. Um, I believe transparency is extremely important, and the onus is on companies or organizations or any sort of public service to make it easy for the public to go through those routes and to complain. Now, they have a right to defend themselves, and if they think the customer is being unreasonable, they can defend themselves. But I believe transparency is extremely important. And people who say, "Oh, that's just you're just complaining, let it go." Again, I would say, people have fought for years to get certain democratic rights, and I don't want to sound like I'm preaching here, but the right to dissent, the right to complain is part of democracy, right? And that's very important. I don't think it's a case of being a fussy person. And I think there's too often this stigma, or there's too often this image that if you complain, oh, you're just a moaning mini, you're just a whinger. I don't agree with that. Yes, there are people who are overly pedantic, and there are people who are perfectionists, and there are people whose criticism is unfair. But more often than not, there are legitimate concerns and there are legitimate frustrations about what people have went through. So if you've paid money and you haven't got the service that you felt your money entitled you to, I think people have a right to complain. How are companies supposed to change if they don't get any feedback? Of course, it's good to get positive feedback as well, and I try to balance it out. If I've had a good experience, I also give praise. I commend the service, so certainly it's important to not be just negative. I totally agree with that. But like I say, I think it's very important that CEOs of any sort of public service, not just CEOs, police commissioners, any body, any public body that works with the public in any capacity, needs to be accountable and transparent. This goes across the board. Politicians, in the UK, MPs have regular surgery. So if people don't like something that one of their policies, something that they're supporting, or if people have concerns, they can meet up at that surgery and raise those concerns. Like I say, the public, we all have responsibilities. So there's no excuse, for example, for threatening behaviour. There's no excuse for anything like that. But we're all human beings, and if you get repeated examples of a company or a service or some public body letting people down, people are going to lose their temper. And I don't think you can take the sort of line that, you can't say people shouldn't have a vacuum for that, for expressing that frustration. There's no excuse, I think, in an airport. I've seen this where you get drunk yobs. Maybe their flight's been cancelled, then they think they can, throw abuse at some airline um, staff member who's not even directly responsible. I think that's wrong. I don't think it helps anyone by just yelling in someone's face. But they also need to understand that it is frustrating for passengers to be delayed for hours on end, sitting in an airport lounge, and so forth. I think the onus is on, like I said, I think transport companies have a long way to go to improve um, their communication. So if there's been a delay, I think they have a long way to go in terms of just improving that basic communication. You're never, ever, ever going to have a perfect situation, but I think certain basic improvements can be made. Having said that, and again, keeping in line with not wanting to be too negative, I also think it's important to commend a company, commend a service when they have done a good job and when they have provided a good service, because that positive feedback is also important. If I ever run a business, I vow, and may God strike me down if I if I betray this, but I vow I will do my best to be transparent and to make it easy for people to be empowered to give me feedback. It doesn't mean that I would always agree with the criticism, but I think you have to be professional. I've worked in situations where I didn't necessarily agree with what the person was saying, and there were times I felt they were being quite rude, but you still have to rise above that and not get into a personal argument. It can be difficult sometimes, but that's the whole point of a public service. You have to be professional, assertive, certainly stand up for yourself, but you have to be professional. Okay, let me know your thoughts. Concluding points: transparency, accountability, providing consumers with empowerment. Those things are very important. And yes, I think complaining does serve a purpose. Not all the time. And, people who certainly want to nitpick at every little thing, I think that's a little bit unhelpful. That is fussy. But complaining itself is not fickle, it has a purpose. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts.